From the Missouri School of Journalism, welcome to Global Journalist. I'm David Reed. The headlines from Honduras this past week indicate a country devolving into chaos. The top anti-money laundering prosecutor is shot to death. The leader of Congress uncovers a plot by drug gangs to assassinate a lawmaker, a police chief, and a television reporter. Congress votes to suspend the Honduran Attorney General and his assistants due to law enforcement ineptitude. Nearly 2,000 police in the capital, Tegucigalpa, go on strike to demand better pay and working conditions. That's 7 days in what's become one of the world's most dangerous countries, a nation that now has the world's highest per capita homicide rate. So what's going on in Honduras? We'll talk to a Honduran journalist to get that answer and put the problems into a wider perspective, and that includes criticism of the United States for giving money to a government linked to death squads. But first, World Watch. This week's international news summary focuses on heads of state and human rights. In South America, Nicolas Maduro was sworn in as Venezuela's president, but his opponent still refuses to recognize the count, which placed him narrowly behind Maduro, and the National Council has agreed to review the results. Voters in Paraguay elected a new president, Horacio Cartes. He's a conservative and a business magnate. The political newcomer defeated the liberal candidate by 9 percentage points. Cartes owns some 24 businesses, including Paraguay's largest cigarette manufacturer. He's also known for criticizing the late Venezuelan president Hugo Chavez. And those sentiments set him apart from neighboring leaders in Argentina, Uruguay, and Brazil. In Guatemala, there's a judicial dilemma in the case against a former dictator. A judge presiding in the genocide trial of General Efraín Ríos Montt refused to follow another judge's ruling that would have forced prosecutors to retry the case. Across the Atlantic, it looks like Italy finally will have a new government 2 months after the general election. The impasse broke this week after Giorgio Napolitano was re-elected president. On Wednesday, the 87-year-old president asked a high-ranking member of a center-left party to cobble together a broad governing coalition. Finally, an Egyptian court agreed to release former President Hosni Mubarak. The ruling stems from charges that Mubarak played a role in the killing of protesters during the uprising that overthrew him 2 years ago. But then another court said Mubarak must remain in prison because of a different criminal charge: corruption. On another topic, the U.S. State Department has issued its annual report on human rights. The document said overall, many governments are harshly suppressing both new and traditional media. The report said that 2012 was the deadliest year for journalists since at least 1997. Also, the number of journalists in prison last year was more than 4 times the number in 2011. As the New York Times pointed out, the State Department said some of the gravest challenges to human rights came in countries where the Arab Spring movement had once raised the greatest hopes. The U.S. diplomatic agency singled out the crackdown on activists in Iran, China, Russia, and elsewhere, and several East African countries were criticized for their continued human rights violations and political oppression: Ethiopia, Somalia, Eritrea. But the State Department report also highlighted a few bright spots: Myanmar, Georgia, and Tunisia. Now that's it for World Watch. Our guest on Global Journalist today is Marco Caceres. He's the founder and editor of Honduras Weekly. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, David.
Now, you're from the Honduras capital, Tegucigalpa, but you run this privately owned independent publication from Washington, D.C. And you wrote a book about the presidential coup in 2009. So let's start there. Why was that a watershed in Honduran history?
Well, it was a watershed in that there had never been a coup in Honduras since the early 80s or late 70s. Since 1981-82, you had peaceful transitions of government every 4 years, with the Liberal Party winning 2 out of 3 times. And the one thing you could count on Honduras, even though it was the third is the third poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, is that you had these peaceful transitions. Things changed, obviously, on June 28th, 2009, with the overthrow of President Manuel Zelaya, and things have gone downhill ever since. However, I think, as you stated earlier in your introduction, it's very important to have some perspective on this because the coup didn't cause all of Honduras's problems. Now it's in many ways it simply sped up what was already taking place in the country. And we can certainly talk about that.
Right. And just to kind of with a broad stroke, what are some of the other major factors that caused this deterioration of safety and security in Honduras? Well,
the primary, by far, is the drug trade. The United States makes up about 5% of the world's population, and yet consumes over 90% of the world's illegal drugs, cocaine primarily, and marijuana. And most of that, 90% or more, comes in through Latin America. About 60% of that comes in through Honduras, Guatemala, Mexico, and Texas. The other comes in through the Caribbean, Jamaica, Puerto Rico. So that alone is driving the most of the violence, not all of it.
And it's spreading down from Mexico?
Well, what's happened is this. You obviously have the drug trade that's coming in through Colombia, then Venezuela, coming up with these on these Cessna-like planes, these narco planes they call them, and they land in the jungles of Nicaragua and eastern Honduras. But that's a big problem. But that's been going on really since the 1970s, 1980s. What's different is that the United States, some 15, 20 years ago, started the drug war in Colombia, and it helped. I mean, a lot. At least it helped Colombia, so that now Colombia is a relatively peaceful country compared to what it was 10 years ago. But it didn't solve the problem. It simply shifted the problem to Venezuela and up north to Central America. 5, 6, 7 years ago, it launched a drug war, obviously with the Mexican government in Mexico, and that has caused something like 50, 60,000 lives in Mexico in the last 5 or 6 years. As that war took hold in Mexico, it forced many of the drug cartels in Mexico to look for safer places. The cartels like the Los Zetas or the Sinaloa cartel. And so they have shifted down to Guatemala and to Honduras, and they've set up operations there. And now you have turf wars. You have these cartels now creating alliances with local organized crime syndicates, and also with organized gangs such as the Mara Salvatrucha, the MS-13, MS-18. These have become the contractor killers in many respects for these drug cartels. So, as you see, it's a very complex situation.
Right, and in November, the International Federation for Human Rights and the Center for Constitutional Rights came out with a scathing report about conditions in Honduras. It describes, quotes, a culture of impunity in Honduras that fosters the continuation and expansion of widespread and systematic attacks. So inside Honduras, what's the perception of the government response to this violence?
Ineffective, poor, very poor. Having said that, given the coup in 2009 and the growth of a grassroots resistance movement in Honduras, the government didn't stand much of a chance. The government of President Lobo, the best he could do, at least the first year or two in office, was to try to calm the situation, try to reach out to the resistance, try to reach out to former President Manuel Zelaya, so that in addition to the drug trafficking, in addition to the crime, the violence, the poverty, you didn't have an explosion, a revolutionary explosion, a backlash for the coup, and largely President Lobo succeeded. Mr. Zelaya is seen oftentimes with President Lobo. They like each other. They get along. The resistance movement has grown, but it has not been violent. It is not an armed movement. And now that movement has formed a political party, and their presidential candidate is the wife of Mr. Zelaya.
Right.
And they, according to polls, have a pretty good chance to win. So overall, President Lobo hasn't done a very good job in terms of, the fiscal situation, the crime, and all that. But in terms of keeping relative peace compared to what it could have been, he's done a decent job.
So, are the opposition candidates being targeted by some of the factions in power and the drug dealers?
The primary ones, no. I mean, I think there's always that danger because all of them are talking about getting tough on corruption, tough on crime, all that, and so I think all of them are at risk for assassination or kidnapping. But there's no information that would lead one to assume that anybody's particularly been targeted. Certainly not. I mean, the government's not targeting anybody. But again, the government isn't a homogeneous entity.
Okay, I wanted to talk a little bit about the potential for international pressure. The two truth commissions and other human rights investigators have documented what they call overwhelming evidence that state-sanctioned death squads are operating in Honduras with what it calls awful efficacy. Could international pressure cause change?
Doubtful, very doubtful. I don't know how, because that assumes, when you say state-sponsored, it assumes, again, that there's somebody at the top that has control over everything that's happening within the state or within the government, and I just don't think that's the case. I think that's actually one of the problems in Honduras traditionally, is that there's always a lot of chaos, a lot of disorder, and so there's certainly elements within the government, certainly you can speculate, that are behind some of these killings or threats. Clearly, organized crime has infiltrated the government and other sectors of the country, just like happened in Colombia when Pablo Escobar was there, just like it's happened in Mexico. Whenever the drug trade thrives and there's a lot of money, there's infiltration in the government. But everybody, and people know who these people are, but everybody's rather fearful of speaking out.
Okay. Let's talk a bit about the influence of the United States on what happens in Honduras. Honduras Weekly wrote this month about the U.S. Treasury Department's designation of Chepe Handel as a key Honduran drug kingpin. Is that significant?
I think it is. I think it's significant in the sense that he's. I believe there might have been another Honduran, but not as high profile. That was identified, but this is really the first person with from a fairly wealthy, well-connected family. The Handel family is large and well known, and so I think the significance to me is that once you expose somebody from a major family, then you start finding connections with other major families, other political associations, and so this might be the first of many to come, but we've yet to see anybody else since.
Right. And how does what's happening now compare with the 1980s when, according to declassified CIA documents, the Reagan administration was implicated in helping the state basically sponsor killings down there. And what's your comparison?
Well, it's too different. It's like comparing apples and oranges, because back then you had the threat of communism in Latin America. You had the Sandinistas in Nicaragua. You had a revolutionary group, the Contras, in Honduras and in Nicaragua. And I think the problem wasn't organized crime. It wasn't drug trafficking. It was more of a geopolitical problem, and so it was more of a threat to the United States. The drug trafficking is certainly a threat to the United States, but not like communism was.
Tell me a little bit about your publication, how it works, who contributes, and what you hope to accomplish with the articles that you write.
Well, one of the Honduras Weekly was founded about 3 to 4 years ago, I believe, and it basically took over for another newspaper called Honduras This Week, which essentially went under. I used to write for that paper occasionally. Yeah. The founder of that newspaper died, and his family took it over for a while, but they just weren't able to keep it going. And certainly the financial situation in Honduras didn't help during the coup. But that paper died, and we decided to revive something similar and call it something different. There is an audience in Honduras for English speakers because there's an increasingly large American expatriate community in the north, particularly in the islands. And so we do have a fairly large readership. Our goal is essentially to be a relatively neutral publication, not conservative, not liberal, at least not too much on either side, and present as many diverse points of view as possible. If you read our articles, there are all kinds, and we include very left and very few very right, but certainly a lot of mainstream and some to the right. And the idea is really to educate our readers. We try to style our newspaper after the Huffington Post, actually, as much analysis and forward-looking pieces as possible, rather than just simply news articles.
Right, and I want to talk about the other media inside Honduras in a minute, but before we continue our program, I want to remind everyone that you can listen to this program anytime by downloading our podcasts from the website, globaljournalist.org. Please send us questions or comments via globaljournalist@kbia.org or our Facebook page. You could also follow us on Twitter @globaljorn. I wanted to, as far as the media inside Honduras, from reading what Reporters Without Borders and the Committee to Protect Journalists is writing these days, the journalists inside Honduras are being increasingly targeted. They with death threats and attempted killings, and there's a lot of self-censorship down there. How would you describe the state of the media inside Honduras?
I think there's a lot of fear, just like there is in Mexico, just like there was in Colombia. Again, the backdrop is the drug trade. I think there have been something like 27, 28 journalists killed in the last 3 to 4 years. That's a huge problem, and there is some self-censorship, but I can't personally attest to that. Like I said, there is fear because of the killings. But I think again, it's important to put this in perspective. There's an average of 20 people murdered in Honduras every day, certainly for the past 2 to 3 years. Before that, it was something like 15 per day. So if you look at it in that context, 27 journalists is pretty bad. But police officers, many more police officers have been killed, lawyers have been killed, taxi drivers have been killed, campesino farmers have been killed. Everybody is being, I wouldn't say targeted, but everybody's being affected by the crime and the violence. But clearly, if you're a journalist, you are a major target because you're writing stories that are exposing people within the government with ties to organized crime. You're exposing gang members. You're exposing drug cartel members, and that's the last thing they want.
Do you sense any change in this impunity that is happening? I think 20% of the homicides have been investigated. Is this culture of impunity, is it getting worse changing at all in your
Well, keep
sense?
in mind, again, everybody, the impunity, it's always been a problem, and obviously not like it is now. But again, Honduras is the third poorest country in the Western Hemisphere.
Right.
It's not for no reason that it's like that. The country functions, but barely.
Mm-hmm.
You can go to Honduras. You can go go on the highways. You can move around. You can eat at nice restaurants. There's a good tourism industry. It's not like going to Africa. It's not like going to Syria or Iraq. It functions relatively okay, but it's still a very poor and disorderly country. And so it's not surprising that the public ministry, the court system, cannot handle this huge caseload. If you have 20 people being killed per day, there's just no way you can keep up with that kind of caseload. They don't have the manpower, the woman power. They don't have the talent. They don't have the equipment. It's a huge bureaucracy that just doesn't function very well.
Right.
And so, yes, there is impunity, but it's not because people don't want to solve problems. It's because they just are not able.
And now the police are on strike. Tell us about that.
Well, see, there you go. That's another issue. I mean, you have police officers that are working, that have been working every day during the week and on weekends, at least 2 weekends out of 4. Many of the police are separated from their families, and they're living in police barracks. And so on the weekends, they get to take a bus or a car or whatever to the countryside, to the village, or to a city where their family lives. And so they get to spend 2 days with their children or wives. But now, recently, the chief of police, Juan Carlos Bonilla, El Tigre, said, look, we have an emergency situation. We don't have enough manpower because crime is high, and we're trying to reform the police, get rid of all the bad cops, bring in some new cops. So we need you to work 3 weekends out of 4. Well, that was kind of the final straw. And so they went on strike. But on top of that, they've been promised a pay raise, I believe, since January. Their pay is probably delayed like everybody else's in the public sector. And so they basically feel disrespected, ignored, and they just kind of have come to the end of their rope. And so they struck, at least those in Tegucigalpa, and it's yet to see how this is going to be resolved. But it's not going to be resolved by hard hand tactics, because ultimately, these people want to see their families.
Right, and the suspension of the Honduran Attorney General and his assistants, is that is kind of a symbolic gesture?
I think it's an act of desperation, an act of frustration, and to a large extent, it's a bit of a show. There's nothing that this commission that they've appointed it's kind of like a control board to come in for 60 days and try to fix things, but they can't do much in 60 days. And these people on the commission aren't necessarily administrators. They're social activists. They're politicians, and so they'll fire a few people. They'll tweak a few things, and then probably Mr. Ruby, the Attorney General, will come back with 1 or 2 of his assistants. So probably some of them will be fired. But it's not going to fix the public ministry. It's not going to fix the judicial system in general. It's really more of a show to demonstrate that the local government is doing something, anything. Right.
So I want to kind of talk a little bit about what you see as potential for change. I know with does it have to start with the economy improving and stopping the drug trade? What are some of the things that have to happen? I see that 28% of the workforce in Honduras is unemployed. 2/3.
Did you say 28%?
28%.
No, 28% of what you got, which is what you have in Spain. In Honduras, those numbers, when you see 28%, don't believe it. The numbers are closer to 50% or more unemployed. 28% it would be wonderful in Honduras.
When is the last time you visited the country?
I go there every year. Last time I was there was in October. We organized an annual NGO conference there in Copan.
What's some of the general feelings? What are some of the general feelings among the population about what's going on there?
Again, there is fear. There is fear because they don't sense that anybody really is in control. Everybody knows that the broader issue is the drug trade, the gangs, the drug traffickers, the drug cartels, and everybody pretty much senses that as long as there is a consumer market in the United States, this problem will not go away. You can send U.S. troops down there. You can retrain the police force. You can keep Honduran troops on the streets. But as long as the drug trade is so lucrative, as long as the U.S. consumer fuels this, there is really very little that Honduras can do. I don't know what the solution is other than to find a way to deal with the drug trade. But that's going to have to originate with the U.S. government.
Right. And the elections in November, if they're proved to be peaceful and there's no corruption, will that help the situation, stabilizing it?
In terms of the crime and the violence?
Well, in terms of, and also the government's relation to the United States and how cooperative the two are?
Not really. I mean, it will. There's things that might make it look superficially better, but the truth is that regardless of which candidate you have, the nationalist liberal candidate, the new anti-corruption candidate, the Libre candidate, it doesn't really matter. One person at the top with bringing in another group of people at the top for 4 years, 4 short years, you can't really do much, is not going to do much. It's not. Certainly, good leadership helps, but you have a dysfunctional system, and a dysfunctional system even in the best of times. And right now, we're kind of at the worst of times. Okay.
Well, we'll have to leave it there, and I hope that conditions improve, and I applaud the work that your publication is doing to bring some of these problems to light.
Thank you.
Okay. Global Journalist is produced by the Reynolds Journalism Institute and the Missouri School of Journalism. Our program is directed by Travis McMillan, audio by Pat Akers. Raymond Tungar is our executive producer. Donovan Ferguson was our lead producer for this program, with assistance from Sasu Siegelbaum and Chelsea Stewart. Please join us again next week for another Global Journalist. I'm David Reed.